Can you give our listeners a summary of how you design and manufacture your products?
Definitely. So this is a design ethos that we have that actually comes from both basically everyone one of the engineers' time in university and college, where in engineering there's a concept of always write it out as a spec sheet, draw it out on paper, because paper is still, or a whiteboard, chalkboard, something along those lines. Don't make it digital because it's easier to manipulate. So when you're coming up with a new design, there's things that you're not sure about, or you're trying to figure out if this is the best way of doing it or this is the best way, especially that initially, having it on paper is a lot more collaborative, is a lot easier to do. Once a general idea of that design, so in the case of a circuit board, the actual circuit diagram, the where things are supposed to be, making sure things add up, at that point is when we transfer into the computer. So we recreate that on, in our case, for PCBs. So for that electronics, we use a program called Altium. It's one of the standard programs that board designers use. We redraw everything out for that circuit, do another double check, and that's when it starts getting into the computer. That's when we start actually creating a computer aided design. And that we've actually been able to show simplifies the process. So both from a time and money perspective, we're much more efficient. So a design that might have to go through 20 different iterations and spend 3 months, if we start with a computer, sometimes can be 25, 30% savings in time just by doing it by hand, just by having that initial process.
So then moving into manufacturing, how does that take place, or how do you start that?
So the manufacturing starts always with a prototype. We have a saying here at Lava that the time you don't prototype is the time that a mistake is going to happen. Prototypes really help make sure it's a small batch. Usually, it's something that we can test. We doesn't always nail down exactly the look and feel of the product, but it works. It's a way to make sure that we got everything right because we're human after all. Things do go wrong. So prototype, then we test. We make sure that everything's happy with the testing. We also look at that point how we want to produce this. So a prototype is where one of our people in production may be doing this by hand. It's something that's not necessarily efficient. It's there just to make sure it works. So then the next question is, great, but how do we make sure that this works so that production is efficient, so that we can build 1,000, 10,000 pieces of this without causing a headache or taking 12 months to build this? So that's the next process. That's still all within the engineering department. Once that's done, we start ordering parts, or we look at the parts that we can use off the shelf, the processes we can use off the shelf, and put it into production. At that point, it's basically like a printing machine. How many units do you want? So sales and marketing comes in and goes, this is how many units we need for an order, or this is how many we think we want to stock because we have an order, but we want to have some backup. So we're that 1 to 2 week lead time that you mentioned at the start.
Mhm,
And we basically let it rip, let production work, and
mhm.
a couple of days later, you have finished product.
So how do you test your products?
So testing for me personally is one of the most interesting portions of our production, and really a cool point about Lava, at least in my opinion. We test every single product. So every individual product that we stock and sell to customers is individually tested. That is very different than what most companies will do, especially in the electronic space. So where the differences lie. When we build 100 units, every single one of them gets put on a test bench, gets connected up to a tablet, in this case, because we're doing tablet adapters right now. Before that was PCs, and gets run through all the standard operations that you would expect out of that unit. So we make sure that when that unit is shipped and arrives at a customer, our failure rate is, I think last year we did something like 3 or 4 units being dead on arrival, DOA, and that's it. And that's over thousands and thousands of units being shipped over the course of a year. The way we test, kind of going back to that individual testing, is that I can go to the back to my production area and guarantee that every single piece that sits on that shelf is going to work, no matter what customer you are, whether you're big or small, and it's going to work the way you need it to the moment it comes out of the box. That is something that Lava prides itself on, That's something that's Lava's been doing since 1984 when we started, no
Mhm.
matter what the product was. And we really stand behind that quality, not only quantity, but quality behind every single product. And that's how we achieve it, by testing every single unit individually.